A millionaire hired a humble woman to be the nanny of his young daughters. One day, the millionaire came home early and started crying when he saw what the new nanny had done. Victor sighed, running her fingers through her wavy brown hair, trying to calm her nerves as she watched the twins, Jasper and Hugo, snuggled into their beds. At 28 years old, Victor was still surprised by the path life had taken her on. Taking care of children in a luxurious mansion in the suburbs of Boston was not what she had initially planned, but she had found an unexpected passion in this job. The connection she developed with the twins and the feeling of making a difference in their lives brought a sense of purpose she hadn't anticipated, but embraced wholeheartedly. The 6-year-old girls with their golden curls and piercing blue eyes were the perfect picture of innocence. Victor smiled tiredly, adjusting Jasper's blanket. "Miss Victor, can you tell one more story, please?" Hugo begged, her eyes shining with hope. "Sweetheart, it's already late. Your parents would be upset if they knew you were still awake," Victor replied gently, resisting the urge to give in to the little girl's request. The children's room was a pastel-colored paradise filled with expensive toys, a stark contrast to the tiny apartment Victor called home. She moved closer to the window, drawing the silk curtains and looking out at the immaculate garden. The night was strangely quiet, almost oppressively so. Victor felt a shiver run down her spine, an inexplicable feeling that something was out of place. As she heard a noise outside, she shook her head, trying to push the thought away. "Girls, did you hear that sound?" Victor asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Jasper responded sleepily, "Just Mr. Whiskers meowing on the roof again. Daddy said one of these days we'll have to call the firefighters to get him down." Victor laughed softly, grateful for the children's innocence. She turned toward the door, ready to turn off the lights and let the girls sleep. That was when she heard it, a distinct creak coming from the hallway, as if someone was trying to move quietly over the old wooden floor. Her heart raced, adrenaline flooding her system. She froze, her fingers tightening on the light switch. "What was that? That does not sound like Mr. Whiskers, does it?" Hugo asked, sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with fear. Victor forced a smile, trying to seem calm. "It is probably just the wind, dear. Go back to sleep." Inside, however, her mind was racing. The Collinses were not supposed to be home for at least 2 more hours. Who could be in the hallway? Victor took a deep breath, trying to calm her frayed nerves. She knew she needed to check, but the thought of leaving the girls alone terrified her. Her protective instinct battled with the need to discover the source of the noise. "Stay here, Hugo. I am just going to take a quick look outside, okay?" Victor said, her voice trembling slightly. Hugo nodded, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "You will be back soon, right?" Victor swallowed hard, forcing a reassuring smile. "Of course, dear. I will be back before you can say bear hug." With one last look at the twins, Victor turned the doorknob, her heart pounding against her ribs. She knew she was about to step into the unknown, but the need to protect the children outweighed her own fear. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped into the dark hallway, leaving the girls alone in the lit room. Victor cautiously moved down the second-floor hallway, her steps nearly silent on the Persian rug that stretched over the polished wooden floor. The darkness seemed to swallow her, broken only by the faint moonlight filtering through the tall windows. Her heart was pounding furiously in her chest, and she could feel cold sweat running down her back with every step. The oppressive silence was interrupted by occasional creaks from the old mansion, making Victor jump. She stopped, straining to catch any unusual sound. "Calm down, Victor. You need to be strong for the girls," she whispered to herself, trying to steady her breathing. A muffled noise from the end of the hallway caught her attention. Victor froze, her eyes widening in the dim light. The sound seemed to be coming from the large built-in closet, used to store linens and extra towels. With hesitant steps, she approached, reaching out with a trembling hand toward the ornate handle. Her instincts screamed at her to run back to the children's room, but something compelled her to keep going. "What is that noise? Is someone there?" "Hello?" Victor called softly, her voice barely rising above a whisper. There was no response, just another muffled sound, as if someone were trying to speak through a cloth. With her heart in her throat, Victor slowly turned the doorknob, feeling each click of the mechanism reverberating through her bones. The door opened with a loud creak, revealing the darkness inside the closet. For a moment, all Victor could feel was a jolt of shock at what she saw. "Oh my God! Mr. and Mrs. Collins, are you all right? Who put you in this closet? What happened? Tell me!" Victor exclaimed, her hand flying to cover her mouth in disbelief. There, huddled on the closet floor, were Mr. and Mrs. Collins, their eyes wide with fear and pleading. They were tightly bound with thick ropes, their mouths gagged with tape. Victor quickly knelt beside them, her hands shaking as she tried to loosen the restraints. Mr. Collins shook his head frantically, begging her with his eyes not to untie them, trying to communicate something through his desperate gaze. "Do not worry. I will get you out of here. Who did this to you?" Victor asked, her voice trembling as she struggled with the knots. At that moment, a shiver ran down Victor's spine, a sense of imminent danger wrapping around her, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Slowly she turned, her body tense with nervousness. Her shadow moved at the edge of her vision, silently sliding down the hallway toward her. Time seemed to freeze as Victor stared into the darkness, her brain struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. Victor's heart raced as the shadow took shape, revealing a tall man wearing a black mask that covered his entire face. His eyes, visible through the slits of the mask, gleamed with a threatening intensity. Victor felt her legs weaken, but survival instinct pushed her into action. Without thinking twice, she turned and ran toward the stairs, her footsteps echoing through the silent hallway. "Help! Help! Please call the police!" Victor screamed, her voice filled with panic as she tried to alert the neighbors, though she knew the property was so large that they probably wouldn't hear her. The intruder, surprisingly agile, advanced quickly. His heavy footsteps pounded behind Victor, growing closer with each passing second. She could feel his presence like a cold and threatening shadow at the back of her neck. Victor reached the top of the stairs, glancing back quickly. The masked man was reaching out, almost touching her shoulder. In a desperate move, she flung herself forward, skipping the first few steps in an attempt to gain distance. "There is no use running. You have nowhere to go." The intruder's rough voice echoed down the hallway. Panic overtook Victor as she rushed down the stairs at a frantic pace, her feet barely touching the steps, and her labored breathing echoing in her ears. Adrenaline surged through her veins, sharpening her senses. She could hear the creaking of the wood under the heavy footsteps of her pursuer, drawing closer with every second. Victor struggled to stay focused, knowing that a single mistake could be fatal. "Think, Victor. Think. There has to be a way out," she told herself. Just as Victor was about to reach the landing, her foot slipped on a polished step. The world seemed to slow down in that moment. She felt her body lose balance, her hands desperately grasping at the air, searching for something to hold on to. The railing was out of reach, and Victor found herself falling. Her body tumbled down the remaining steps, each impact sending waves of pain through her muscles and bones. "No, the girls. I need to protect them," Victor thought, her mind a mixture of pain and desperation. The world around Victor began to darken as she finally stopped rolling, her body motionless at the bottom of the stairs. Pain throbbed in every inch of her being, and she fought to stay conscious. Through her blurred vision, Victor saw the masked figure slowly descending the stairs toward her. The sound of the intruder's footsteps echoed in her ears, blending with the ringing that now filled her mind. "Please, someone, help," Victor whispered, her voice barely audible as the darkness threatened to swallow her. Victor felt a paralyzing fear, not for what might happen to her, but for the safety of the children. With a final effort, Victor tried to move, but her body would not respond. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was the shadow of the intruder looming over her, growing larger as he approached. "God, protect the girls," she prayed silently. It was the last thought she had before darkness consumed her completely. Minutes later, consciousness slowly returned to Victor, like a fog lifting. Her eyes opened to the oppressive darkness of the basement, and she tried to move, only to discover that her arms and legs were tightly bound to a wooden chair. The throbbing pain in her head made her groan softly, as memories of the earlier events flooded her mind in chaotic flashes. The cold of the basement seeped into her bones, and the smell of mold and dampness filled her nostrils. Victor blinked rapidly, trying to adjust her vision to the dim light, as the hazy outlines of stacked boxes and old furniture gradually took shape around her. The twins. The Collins. Oh God. What might have happened to them while I was unconscious? Victor murmured to herself, her heart racing with worry. Fighting against the growing panic, she tested the restraints on her wrists and ankles. The ropes were thick and tight, digging into her skin with every movement. She gritted her teeth, determined not to give in to despair. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for something, anything, she could use to free herself. A rusty old saw hanging on the opposite wall caught her attention. So close, yet impossibly far. There has to be a way out of here, she whispered, her mind racing through possible escape scenarios. The eerie silence of the basement was broken by a sharp creak from the house above. Victor froze, her muscles tense with apprehension. Footsteps. Someone was moving on the lower floor, and from the sound of it, they were getting closer to the basement door. Each step echoed like thunder in her ears, making her heart beat even faster. She swallowed hard, trying to control her labored breathing. Stay calm, Victor. You need to stay alert to find a way out, she thought, forcing herself to breathe more slowly. The footsteps suddenly stopped, followed by the metallic sound of a key turning in the lock. Victor felt the blood run cold in her veins. Her eyes locked on the basement door in front of her, waiting for it to open at any moment. The seconds dragged on like hours, each moment of anticipation more agonizing than the last. She could hear her own heart pounding against her ribs, so loud she was sure the intruder could hear it too. If it's the intruder from the house, I will not let him intimidate me. I need to be strong for the children. If he's busy with me, they'll be safe. I have to make it as difficult as possible for him so they have time to escape or get help. I will not go down easily. I will put up a fight so the girls can stay safe, Victor promised herself, gathering all the courage she could. With a soft click, the doorknob began to turn. Victor held her breath, her wide eyes fixed on the door, as it slowly creaked open on its rusty hinges. A sliver of light spread down the basement stairs, growing as the door opened wider. The dark silhouette of a figure began to form against the light, and Victor felt her entire body tremble with fear and anticipation. "Who is there? What do you want?" Victor shouted, her voice shaking but determined not to show weakness. Upstairs, Jasper and Hugo woke up, startled by the sound of a muffled scream. The twins exchanged nervous glances in the dim light of their room, their wide eyes reflecting the fear they felt. Hugo, the braver of the two, was the first to get out of bed, her bare feet making almost no sound on the plush carpet. "Jasper, did you hear that? It sounded like Miss Victor. We need to check if she's all right," Hugo whispered, reaching out her hand to her sister. Jasper hesitated for a moment but then took her sister's hand, allowing herself to be pulled out of bed. The two, in their matching unicorn pajamas, quietly made their way to the bedroom door. Hugo carefully turned the doorknob, opening it a crack to peek into the dark hallway. Seeing no one, she signaled to Jasper, and they both stepped into the hallway. "What if it's a monster? Maybe we should go back to bed," Jasper asked, her voice trembling. Hugo squeezed her sister's hand, trying to give her courage. "Don't be silly. Monsters aren't real. Besides, Miss Victor might need our help." The twins tiptoed down the stairs, their hearts pounding in their chests. They couldn't hear their parents, who were once again tied up in the closet, unable to warn their daughters. The girls reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped, listening intently. A muffled sound came from the direction of the kitchen. "Come on, it must be Miss Victor. Maybe she's making hot chocolate for us," Hugo whispered, pulling Jasper toward the kitchen. Jasper followed reluctantly, clinging to her sister's arm. But what if it's not her? What if it's someone bad? That noise we heard was really strange. The girls entered the dark kitchen, their eyes slowly adjusting to the lack of light. The full moon cast a silvery glow through the window above the sink, partially illuminating the room. Hugo felt along the wall for the light switch, but froze when she heard a creak coming from the basement door. "Jasper, look, there's someone there," Hugo whispered, pointing toward the basement entrance. The twins stood frozen as a shadowy figure slowly emerged from the darkness of the basement. The silhouette was tall and menacing, definitely not Miss Victor. The girls' hearts raced, and they clung to each other, trying not to make a sound. Hugo squeezed Jasper's hand, their fingers trembling with fear. With her heart pounding frantically, she pulled her sister toward the back door of the kitchen. Their bare feet made barely any noise on the cold floor as they moved cautiously, their eyes locked on the dark figure emerging from the basement. The twins crouched as they made their way around the kitchen island, using it as a shield while they inched closer to the exit. Hugo handled the doorknob with care, turning it slowly so it wouldn't make a sound. "Slowly, Jasper," Hugo whispered, her voice barely audible. "We can't let him hear us." The door creaked open slightly, causing the girls to freeze for a moment. The night breeze flowed in through the gap, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant sound of crickets. Hugo glanced back one last time, making sure the intruder was still distracted, before pulling Jasper out into the backyard. The full moon bathed the well-kept lawn in a silvery light, casting long and unsettling shadows. "Hugo, I'm scared. Where is Miss Victor?" Jasper whimpered, clinging to her sister's arm. The twins moved across the yard, their feet sinking into the dew-covered grass. They zigzagged, using the shadows cast by ornamental shrubs and fruit trees for cover. Hugo's heart pounded so loudly she was sure it could be heard from miles away. Her eyes scanned the yard, desperately searching for a safe place to hide or a way to escape. "We have to get to Mrs. Patel's house," Hugo decided, remembering the kind neighbor who always greeted them. "She will help us, Jasper." As they neared the fence that separated their yard from the neighbors, a sudden movement caught Hugo's attention. She stopped abruptly, pulling Jasper behind a large hydrangea bush. The large flowers provided perfect cover, and the girls crouched down, trying to control their ragged breathing. Hugo peeked through the leaves, her eyes wide with fear, as she saw the kitchen door swing fully open. "He's coming, Jasper, don't move," Hugo whispered, her voice trembling. Her eyes wide with fear, Hugo swallowed hard, her mind racing for an answer. "Don't worry, he won't find us. Dad always says we're his little silent ninjas, remember?" The intruder was now directly beneath the treehouse, his head tilted back, scanning the branches above. The twins held their breath, shrinking further into the darkest corner of the small structure. Hugo could see the gleam of the man's eyes through his mask, sweeping over every inch of the tree. For one terrible moment, she was certain he had spotted them. "Where are you, you little pests? Come out, wherever you are." The intruder's rough voice echoed through the yard. At that moment, Jasper shifted slightly, her elbow bumping into an old plastic toy forgotten in the corner of the treehouse. The toy slowly slid toward the edge of the platform. Hugo watched in horror as, in what felt like slow motion, the toy fell from the treehouse, landing right at the intruder's feet. In the silence of the night, the sound of the plastic hitting the grass seemed deafening. "Oh no. Now he's going to find us for sure," Hugo thought, her heart nearly stopping. The sound of the toy hitting the ground echoed through the yard, and the girls heard the intruder's footsteps quickly approaching the treehouse. Thinking fast, Hugo grabbed Jasper's hand and pulled her toward a large toy chest in the corner of the platform. Moving frantically, she opened the lid and pushed her sister inside. "Quick, Jasper, get in, and stay quiet," Hugo whispered urgently. The girls had barely closed the lid when they heard the creak of the treehouse ladder. The intruder was climbing up. Inside the dark, cramped chest, the twins clung to each other, trying to control their ragged breathing. The smell of old wood and dusty toys filled the air around them. Hugo could feel Jasper's heart pounding furiously against hers. "Please, dear God, protect us. Do not let this man find us," Hugo prayed silently, squeezing her sister's hand. The heavy footsteps of the intruder echoed on the wooden platform of the treehouse. The twins listened as he moved around, rummaging through things, searching for them. The sound was so close they were certain he could hear their breathing. Hugo squeezed her eyes shut, thinking that if she couldn't see the danger, maybe it wouldn't be able to see them either. "Where are you, you little pests?" The intruder's rough voice reached the girl's ears, muffled but terrifying. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps faded away. The girls heard the intruder descending the treehouse ladder, muttering in frustration. Even so, they didn't dare move or make a sound. They remained still and silent for several minutes, until they were sure the danger had passed. "Hugo, I think he's gone. Can we get out now?" Jasper whispered, her voice trembling. Carefully, Hugo cracked open the lid of the chest, peeking outside. The yard was quiet and appeared empty. She motioned to Jasper, and both of them slowly climbed out of the chest, their legs numb from staying in the same position for so long. The twins approached the edge of the treehouse cautiously, observing the yard and the house. "Look, Hugo, he's up there now." Jasper pointed to a light that had just turned on in their parents' bedroom. In the master bedroom, the intruder was frantically rifling through drawers and closets, tossing clothes and objects onto the floor. His movements were quick and determined, as if he knew exactly what he was looking for. He paused for a moment, running a hand over his face in frustration, before his eyes locked onto a large painting on the opposite wall. "It must be here," the man muttered to himself as he approached the painting. With a sharp tug, he pulled the painting off the wall, revealing a small safe built into the wall. A crooked smile spread across his lips as he ran his fingers over the metal surface of the safe. "Bingo. Now I just need to figure out the combination," he said with satisfaction. In the dark, damp basement, Victor was struggling against the ropes that bound her to the chair. Her wrists were raw from the constant friction, but she couldn't afford to stop. Every second was precious, and her worry for the twins consumed her. As she worked on loosening the restraints, her mind drifted back to the moment when she had heard footsteps approaching the basement door just minutes before. It was pure luck that whoever was trying to come down here gave up, Victor thought, a shiver running down her spine. But what if he found the girls? With one final desperate tug, Victor felt the ropes loosen. "Now I need to find the twins and get them out of here," Victor murmured to herself, determination shining in her eyes. Victor moved silently through the dark hallway, her aching body protesting with every step. She had managed to free herself from the basement, using a broken piece of glass she found on the floor, but the process had left her wrists raw and bleeding. Her heart pounded frantically as she approached Mr. Collins's office, knowing that every second counted. The children were still in danger, and she had to act fast. "Hang in there, girls. I will get you out of this, no matter what it takes," Victor whispered to herself. When she reached the office door, Victor pressed her ear against the wood, listening carefully for any sign of the intruder. Satisfied with the silence, she slowly turned the doorknob, silently thanking her luck when the door opened without a creak. The office was bathed in silver moonlight streaming through the window, revealing shelves lined with books and an imposing mahogany desk. Victor quickly moved to the desk, her eyes scanning frantically for the phone. Come on, I need to call the police before it's too late," she whispered, rummaging through the papers on the desk. Finally, her fingers found the phone beside a stack of documents. With trembling hands, Victor picked up the receiver and dialed the police, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the dial tone. Every second felt like an eternity as she waited for someone to answer, her eyes constantly darting back to the door, fearing the intruder might appear at any moment. However, on the other side of the house, the intruder dragged Mr. and Mrs. Collins down the hallway, their hands still tightly bound behind their backs. The moonlight streaming through the windows cast distorted shadows on the walls, making the scene even more sinister. The masked man shoved the couple against the built-in cabinets, the dull thud echoing through the silent hallway. His eyes, visible through the slits of the mask, glowed with a mixture of determination and anger. "Now, you two are going to tell me the code to that safe. And do not try any tricks, or things are going to get real ugly around here," the intruder growled, his voice low and threatening, before ripping the tape off the mouths of his captives. Mr. Collins, despite the obvious fear in his eyes, remained firm. "We don't know what you're talking about. What safe?" The intruder laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Do not play smart with me. I know about the safe behind the painting." What's in there that's worth hiding, huh? Mrs. Collins sobbed quietly, trying to keep herself composed. Please, we have young daughters. Do not hurt our girls. The masked man leaned in closer, his face inches from hers. Then you better start talking. Where are the kids? And what's the damn code? At that moment, a subtle noise from the office caught everyone's attention. The intruder spun around quickly, his eyes narrowing with suspicion that someone might be trying to call the police. Without hesitation, he pulled a pair of pliers from his pocket and headed toward the phone panel in the hallway. Meanwhile, in the office, Victor anxiously waited for someone to pick up the emergency call. After what felt like hours, the call was answered. Police, what is your emergency? The calm voice of the operator finally came through on the other end. Victor took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice low and steady. Please, we need help. There's an intruder in the house. He has tied up the owners and is looking for the children. I'm at the Collins residence on... At that moment, Victor heard a noise coming from the hallway. Her blood ran cold, and she quickly ducked behind the desk, still clutching the phone tightly. The sound of heavy footsteps grew closer, and Victor could feel the panic rising in her chest. She knew she needed to finish the call quickly, but the fear of being discovered paralyzed her. Ma'am, are you still there? What's the full address? The operator's voice sounded distant in her ears. Victor gathered all her courage and whispered urgently into the phone. It's on Maple Street, number... But before she could finish, the call abruptly dropped, leaving only the sound of a dead dial tone. No, they don't know where we are, Victor thought desperately. On the other side of the house, with quick and precise movements, the intruder cut all the telephone wires, effectively isolating the house from the outside world. Before Victor could give the house number to the police, he muttered in a menacing tone. Looks like we have a little rat hiding around here. This is going to be interesting. I think I need to go find it. Please do not hurt anyone. The code is 2418 and 42, Mrs. Collins said. The intruder turned to her. See? That wasn't so hard, was it? Now let's have a little look at what you're hiding in there. As he turned back to head toward the master bedroom, another sound came from the office. The intruder paused, tilting his head slightly. Looks like our little rat is getting careless. I think it's time to welcome our surprise guest. No, please leave us alone. Do not hurt my daughters or the nanny. None of them have anything to do with this. What did you do to the nanny anyway? Mr. Collins asked, his voice trembling with concern. The intruder laughed again, the sound sending chills down the Collinses' spines. Oh, do not worry about her. I'm sure she's having a nice nap down in the basement. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a safe to crack and a rat to catch. Meanwhile, in the office, Victor heard footsteps heading toward the attic. Her heart in her throat, she followed. The sound of feet on the floorboards above suggested more than one person, so her eyes frantically scanned the dimly lit attic space. Searching for any sign of the twins, Victor whispered, Jasper? Hugo? Are you here? It's me, Victor. Everything's going to be okay now. Her voice was barely audible. A slight movement behind a pile of old boxes caught her attention. Victor approached cautiously, and her heart leapt when she saw two pairs of frightened eyes staring back at her. The twins were huddled in a corner, holding each other tightly, their faces pale with fear. Victor knelt in front of them, tears of relief welling in her eyes. Oh, thank God. Are you two all right? Victor asked, checking the girls for any signs of injury. Hugo, always the braver one, was the first to speak. Victor, we thought the bad man had hurt you. We were so scared. We ran out of the treehouse and hid in here to help you. Victor hugged the twins tightly, feeling their small bodies tremble against hers. She knew they didn't have much time, but she allowed herself this brief moment of comfort. The danger was still very real, and Victor could feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She needed to get the girls out of there, and quickly. Listen, girls, we need to leave. I'm going to get you out of this house, but I need you to be very brave and very quiet. Can you do that for me? Victor said, keeping her voice low but firm. Jasper, with tears in her eyes, nodded silently. But how are we going to get out, Victor? The bad man is downstairs, Hugo asked. Victor looked around the attic, her mind racing to find a way out. Her eyes landed on a small window in the roof, partially covered by an old tarp. It was risky, but it might be their only chance. She stood up, gently pulling the twins along with her. "We are going to use that window. We can climb down onto the roof and jump to the nearest tree. You've done that when playing before, right?" Victor explained, pointing to the window. The girls nodded, a flicker of excitement mixed with fear in their eyes. Victor began moving some boxes to clear a path to the window, trying to be as quiet as possible. Every noise seemed deafening in the tense silence of the attic. She could feel the sweat running down her back, not just from the physical effort, but from the constant tension. "Almost there. Just a little more, and we'll be out," Victor whispered, stretching to reach the window latch. That's when they heard it, a distinct creak coming from the attic stairs. Slow, heavy footsteps climbed step by step. Victor froze, her blood running cold. The twins clung to her legs, their small bodies shaking with fear. The sound grew closer with every step, each one echoing like a death sentence. "He's coming." "What are we going to do now, Victor?" Hugo whispered, terror clear in her voice. Victor acted quickly, her mind racing to find a solution. With a swift gesture, she grabbed Hugo and Jasper by the hand and led them to the small attic window. The dusty glass offered a narrow view of the roof and the garden below. Victor knew it was dangerous, but they had no other choice. With quick, precise movements, she unlocked the window and pushed it open, feeling the cool night air against her face. "Girls, we need to be very brave right now. We are going to climb down the roof to the garage. Can you do that for me?" Victor whispered, looking into the twins' eyes. Victor helped Hugo out first, then Jasper, guiding them carefully onto the slanted roof. Their bare feet found little grip on the slippery tiles, but fear drove them forward. Victor followed last, casting nervous glances at the attic stairs every few seconds. The sound of footsteps had stopped, but she knew it was only a matter of time before the intruder caught up to them. "We're almost there, girls. Just a little more," Victor whispered, her voice barely audible. As they reached the edge of the roof, Victor assessed the distance to the ground. It was a considerable drop, but there was a large tree branch that could serve as an improvised support. Carefully, she helped the twins climb down the tree, their small hands gripping tightly to the wooden branches. Once they were all safely on the ground, Victor quickly led them to the garage, their hearts racing. "The garage is locked. How are we going to get in?" Hugo asked, pulling on the handle in vain. Victor looked around frantically, searching for a solution. Her eyes landed on a small side window, just big enough for the girls to fit through. In one swift motion, she broke the glass with her elbow, ignoring the sharp pain and the blood that started to drip down her arm. She helped the twins through the window, and then squeezed herself through the opening, landing on the concrete floor of the garage. "Quick, get in the car. We're getting out of here," Victor instructed, rushing to the Collins family's sedan. With trembling hands, Victor searched for the keys she knew were hidden under the sun visor. Finding them, she slid them into the ignition with a sigh of relief. The twins settled into the back seat, their heavy breathing filling the intense silence. Victor turned the key, but her relief was short-lived. The engine sputtered, but the car didn't move. No, please work," Victor muttered, trying again. Getting out of the car, Victor ran to check what was wrong. Her heart sank when she saw all 4 tires completely slashed. The intruder had thought of everything. In that moment of despair, a pair of headlights suddenly illuminated the garage entrance, momentarily blinding them. Victor froze, instinctively positioning herself to shield the children. "Who is it? Is it the bad man?" Hugo asked, her voice shaking with fear. Victor's heart leapt when she looked out the window and recognized the distinctive colors of a police car. The headlights that had frightened her were actually from the police vehicle. The siren was off, but the lights flashed silently, casting blue and red glows across the night. 2 officers stepped out of the car, their hands cautiously resting on their weapons. Victor felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew the danger wasn't over yet. "Police? Is anyone there?" one of the officers called out, his firm and authoritative voice echoing through the garage. "Here, please help us. There's an intruder in the house," Victor shouted, waving frantically. The following events unfolded in a whirlwind of action. Victor hugged the twins protectively, watching the scene with a mix of fear and hope. "Stay here, girls. Everything is going to be fine now," Victor instructed, her voice trembling slightly. The intruder was quick, leaping over bushes and weaving through trees in the backyard, but the officers were right behind him, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. One of the officers managed to get close enough to grab the fugitive's arm. There was a brief struggle, with the intruder thrashing wildly, but the officer's training prevailed. With a swift move, he brought the man to the ground and handcuffed him. "You're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent," the officer declared. As the first officer escorted the intruder back to the front of the house, the second officer approached Victor and the children, his face showing a mix of concern and relief. "Are you all right? Is anyone hurt?" Victor shook her head, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. "We're fine, thank God." "But the girls' parents, they're still inside." The officer nodded, immediately heading into the house to check. Minutes later, which felt like an eternity, he returned with Mr. and Mrs. Collins, both visibly shaken but unharmed. The twins ran into their parents' arms, sobbing with relief and joy. "Mommy! Daddy!" the girls cried out in unison, clinging to their parents with all their strength. As the family reunited, the intruder was placed in the police car. His mask had been removed, revealing a face that Mr. Collins recognized. With a sigh of surprise, he said, "Isabella?" It was Isabella, a former employee who had been fired months earlier for misconduct. "Isabella, why?" Mr. Collins asked, his voice a mix of shock and disappointment. The former employee shot a look of pure hatred at his old boss. "You ruined my life when you fired me. I just wanted what was mine by right," he spat. Victor watched the scene unfold, feeling a complex mix of emotions, relief that it was all over, pride for having protected the children, and deep gratitude for the timely arrival of the police. She approached the Collins family, who were now huddled in a tight embrace. Mrs. Collins, still trembling from the traumatic experience, turned to Victor with tear-filled eyes. She held the nanny's hands between her own, squeezing them with a blend of gratitude and emotion. The twins, Hugo and Jasper, clung to their mother's legs, their small faces still marked by fear, but now also by relief. "Victor, I don't even know where to begin," Mrs. Collins said, her voice choked with emotion. "What you did for our family tonight. There aren't enough words to express our gratitude. You risked your own life to protect our girls, showing a courage and dedication that goes far beyond your duties as a nanny." Mrs. Collins paused, taking a deep breath to hold back the tears threatening to fall. Victor could feel the woman's hands trembling and the weight of her words. The flashing lights of the police cars cast dancing shadows over the group, creating a surreal backdrop for this moment of intense emotion. "When we hired you, we knew you were special, but we could never have imagined just how special you really are," Mrs. Collins continued, her voice gaining strength. "You're not just a nanny, Victory. You're a guardian angel, a hero. What you did tonight, the way you kept our daughters safe, how you faced danger, it shows the kind of person you are." The twins, listening to their mother's words, looked at Victory with a mix of admiration and love. Hugo, the more talkative of the two, whispered, "You're our superhero, Victory." Mrs. Collins smiled through her tears at her daughter's comment. "And she's right. Victory, you are a superhero, not just for the girls, but for all of us. That's why we want you to know that from now on, you're not just our nanny. You're part of our family." Victory felt a lump form in her throat, deeply moved by Mrs. Collins' words. She didn't know what to say, feeling both honored and humbled by such praise. The adrenaline of the night was beginning to wear off, leaving her exhausted but profoundly grateful that everyone was safe. "You deserve a promotion, Victory," Mrs. Collins continued, a genuine smile lighting up her tired face. "Not just a raise, but a position with more responsibility within our family and our business. You've proven you can handle anything, and we want you to grow with us." Mr. Collins, who had been silently observing the scene, stepped forward. He placed a comforting hand on his wife's shoulder, and looked directly at Victory, his eyes reflecting a deep sense of gratitude and respect. "Victory," he began, his deep voice filled with emotion. "What my wife said only scratches the surface of how much we want to express. Your courage, your quick thinking, your devotion to our daughters. All of this has shown us that you are far more than we ever could have hoped for in a nanny." Mr. Collins paused, glancing briefly at his daughters, who were now smiling shyly at Victory. "You not only saved our girls' lives, but you also protected our family in a way that we will never be able to repay. Your swift action, your intelligence in handling such a dangerous situation, it demonstrates exceptional character." He took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. "So, in addition to the promotion my wife mentioned, we want to offer you a stake in our business. We want you to be part of not only our family, but also our future. Your insight and bravery are qualities we value greatly, and we believe you have so much more to contribute to our company." Victory was stunned. She looked from Mr. Collins to Mrs. Collins, her eyes wide with surprise. I don't know what to say," she stammered, feeling overwhelmed by the generosity and trust they were placing in her. Mr. Collins smiled gently. "You don't need to say anything right now, Victory. We know that tonight has been traumatic for all of us, but we want you to know how much we value you and how much we trust in your abilities. You are not just an employee to us. You are family." The twins, sensing the emotion of the moment, ran over to hug Victory. Hugo and Jasper wrapped their little arms around Victory's waist, their faces pressed against her in a tight embrace. "Please say you'll stay with us forever, Victory," Jasper pleaded, her voice muffled against Victory's shirt. Victory felt the tears finally escape, rolling silently down her cheeks as she hugged the girls back. She looked up at Mr. and Mrs. Collins, who watched the scene with emotional smiles. "Thank you," Victory finally managed to say, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for trusting me, for giving me this opportunity. I love these girls like they are my own sisters, and I am honored to be part of your family." Mr. and Mrs. Collins joined the embrace, wrapping their arms around Victory and the twins in a circle of love and gratitude. In that moment, under the flashing lights of the police cars and the starry sky, a new family was formed, united by bonds forged through adversity and strengthened by love and mutual trust. 6 months after that fateful night, Isabella remained in prison, and the Collins residence exuded a completely different atmosphere. The once quiet garden now echoed with the joyful laughter of Jasper and Hugo, who played carefree on the lush green grass. The house, once a scene of terror, had transformed into a true home filled with love and security. Victory, now not just a nanny but an integral part of the Collins family, watched the girls from the porch, a serene smile on her face. Her promotion came with a generous raise and, more importantly, a deep sense of belonging. The scars on her wrists, physical reminders of that night, had faded, just like the nightmares that once haunted her. Mr. and Mrs. Collins emerged from the house carrying a tray of fresh lemonade. The couple had undergone a remarkable transformation. The trauma of the invasion had brought them closer in ways they had never imagined. Now, they prioritized family time, working fewer hours and dedicating themselves to creating precious memories with their daughters. "Victory, dear, come join us," Mrs. Collins called out, her radiant smile reflecting the peace she had finally found. The twins ran toward the porch, their faces flushed with excitement. Hugo, always the more talkative, began excitedly recounting her adventures in the garden, while Jasper, still a little shy, cuddled into Victory's lap. It was the perfect picture of domestic happiness. Mr. Collins raised his glass in an impromptu toast. "To our family, including you, Victory. We could not be more grateful to have you in our lives," he said, his voice filled with emotion. That fateful night had left its marks, but it had also brought positive changes. The house's security had been upgraded with a state-of-the-art alarm system, and the local community had grown closer, with neighbors looking out for one another. The safe, once an object of greed, now held not only valuables but also precious family memories. Isabella, the former employee who had caused so much terror, was serving his sentence in prison. The Collins family, in a compassionate decision that surprised many, chose not to push for the maximum sentence, believing in the possibility of rehabilitation. The twins, though still occasionally haunted by nightmares, were recovering well. Family therapy sessions helped them process the trauma, and Victory's constant loving presence gave them an added sense of security. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the Collins family and Victory remained on the porch, enjoying each other's company. The air was full of promises for a bright future, where love and trust had triumphed over fear and adversity. That night, when Victory tucked the girls into bed, there was no hesitation or fear, only a deep sense of peace and gratitude. As she gently closed the bedroom door, she smiled, knowing she was exactly where she belonged, home with her family.